Continuing with John Locke's view of personal identity and substance. So at this point, Locke lays out his definition of person, and he defines it in the following way. A person for him has the following qualities. First, it's a thinking, intelligent being, which does have considerable appeal because, to be kind of silly, the one way we distinguish between rocks and people is that people think and rocks, as far as we know, don't. Second standard, a person has reason and reflection. Thirdly, can consider itself as itself the same thinking thing in different times and places. So it has self-awareness. And according to Locke, this is all done by consciousness, which he regards as inseparable from thinking. So those are the features that are required to be a person. Now, of course, this has broad-reaching implications, because if a being didn't meet those conditions or lost those abilities, say lost the ability to reason, reflect, and think, and lost self-awareness, it could go from having been a person to not being a person. And of course, there are entities that some would regard as people that wouldn't meet this definition. To use an obvious example, before someone is born, if you just have the cells there, the zygote, unless the zygote is thinking and intelligent and reasoning and reflecting, on Locke's definition, it wouldn't be metaphysically a person. Now, just because Locke is, really smart and dead doesn't mean he's right, and all definitions of person can be debated and disputed. But those are the standards he lays out. And if something meets them, person. If something doesn't, not. Now, consciousness is a critical part of his theory here. And, spoiler alert, it is the basis of personal identity. So he thinks that consciousness always accompanies thinking. So whenever you're thinking, you're conscious. And here is where he lays out why consciousness is what makes personal identity. It's what makes a person who they are, also distinguishes them from all other things. So consciousness plays a critical role here. And to emphasize it further and drive it home even more, he says consciousness is a sole basis of personal identity, the sameness of rational being. So he handles the question, what is a person, with those standards. He answers the question, what is it that distinguishes a person from all of the things, consciousness, and what about identity across time, backwards or forwards? Well, the answer for him is consciousness. So as far as your consciousness goes, you go. Crudely speaking, you can take this to be memory. So as far back as your memory goes, you would go, at least according to Locke. Now he does consider, kind of an obvious concern, which is this. People do forget. And he says if people did not forget, few people would doubt the same thinking thing was always present. But he does note, correctly of course, that we do forget. And this raises doubts about whether we are the same thinking substance or not, according to him. But he's got a fix or a workaround. He says, which may seem somewhat problematic, he says this does not concern personal identity, which is about, on his view, sameness of person, not sameness of substance. So he's disagreeing with those who would take personal identity to be, same substance, same person. So again, he reiterates what it is. It's consciousness. So the same consciousness makes a entity themselves to themselves. And so he claims, again, sort of really driving it home over and over. So personal identity depends on that alone, regardless of substance or substances. So he's super clear about this. So kind of a key thing to Locke is, what is it that makes a person the person they are? Consciousness. What is it that separates a person from all other things? Consciousness. Now, to support it, he uses the following argument, or arguments. He notes that the self, on his view, extends as far as the same consciousness can extend to actions in the past or to the future. And then he makes use of an analogy to support his view. And as you might recall, an argument by analogy involves arguing that because two things are alike in certain ways, they're alike in some other way. And assessing these involves considering the number of similarities, the relevance of similarities, and whether there are any relevant dissimilarities or not. And his analogy is this. He contends that a change of substance no more makes two people than changing clothes after a night's sleep would make two humans. Which, it's true that changing clothes, although we do say that the clothes make the man, does not change a person from one human to another. But the question is, of course, is the analogy a good one? Locke also goes to talking about the hand argument, which is this. And he does involve, in his discussion, a few times bits being cut off. In this case, a hand, later a little finger, a couple times. And so he notes that what concerns us, and the concern thing will come up later as well, is what is part of us. And so he says, cut off a hand and separate it from the consciousness, it would no more be a part of a person than the remotest part of matter, which is true. Now, obviously, a person would be very concerned if their hand was cut off, but Locke's point is that consciousness is what makes us, ourself, or so he claims. Next, he turns to an interesting problem that arises given his view, and the problem is this. Can it be the same person through a change of substances? So what is he talking about here? Well, what he's asking us to consider is, what if the memory or consciousness of a person leaves the substance and then goes into another substance? In other words, what we're talking about here is kind of the sci-fi or fantasy thing of memory transference or memory, exchange. And the reason why the film poster for Arnold Schwarzenegger's 6 Day film is, the film, spoiler, is about cloning. And the clones, of course, have the memories of the original put in there. And a clone, unless they're informed they're a clone, will think they're the original person. So, if the consciousness of past actions can be transferred from one thinking thing to another, how could this occur? And Locke says we can only resolve this question, is it the same person through change of substance, if we can answer the question of what kind of thinking substance is a person. And the second question would be, can the consciousness of past actions be transferred from one to another? So if the same consciousness is not the same individual according to Locke, we must know why one thinking substance may think it did something it did not, or why such a thought may be without reality, like in a dream. So what he's putting forth is essentially the problem of, memory transfer. And again, it's, typically the thing of science fiction or fantasy, but there are those who are working seriously on this because, for the obvious reason, it would provide a backup, a life insurance policy. And not one of the ones where you pay lots of money, then someone else gets money when you die, but one where you die, then you get brought back, which would be the best life insurance of all. So let's imagine kind of a sci-fi scenario to show why this would be why Locke recognizes this as a problem. And this is my example, not Locke's, but it's to illustrate his view. Imagine it's in the near future, and a company, we'll call this company Life Insurance, has perfected memory transfer. And for a fee, what they'll do is they'll clone you, grow it up to whatever age you want, store it, and then back up your memories. And they put an implant in your head that sends out regular updates to your memory storage. And in the event of your death, it sends out a death signal informing insurance to thaw out your clone, load the memories, and get you on with your life. And suppose you realize that with life insurance, you are effectively seemingly immortal. You literally cannot die. So you decide to try like really dangerous things you've always wanted to do, but were worried would kill you. So suppose you decide to, get up on the top of Mount Everest, put on one of those glider squirrel suits, flying squirrel suits, and jump off and glide all the way to the bottom. And you're gliding along, and then the next thing you know is you're waking up in Toledo, Ohio, in the life insurance office, and you're greeted by a calm person who says, everything is all right. The clone worked perfectly. Your memories were downloaded. Although I do have to inform you that some of your memories were lost. Apparently, when you had your incident, you struck your head, and the transmitter was damaged. So we lost the signal, and we revived you. Thank you for using life insurance. So you get your stuff together. You go through like the rehab process. You get back into your normal life, and you go back home. You're sitting there eating breakfast, and then one day, in walks you. Apparently, bandages around your head, because what happened is you didn't actually die when you went off the mountain. You just smacked your head, and it broke the implant and sent off the seeming death signal. But you are still alive. But then you're also in the kitchen eating breakfast. So there is now two of you with the same, essentially the same memories. And that's clearly a problem, because personal identity is supposed to be such that it's what makes you distinct from all other things. So how does Locke fix this? What is his workaround to ensure that this sort of problem doesn't happen? Well, his main concern is not so much that there'll be, clones of people running around with different memories. His main concern is about reward and punishment. That we'll see this in the future, that Locke is very worried that since reward and punishment links to identity, that if the memory of a person who is, say, bad ended up in the substance of someone who wasn't bad, then they would be deserving of the punishment for being bad, even though it would seem like they didn't do it, although on Locke's view they would have, because they have the same memory. And likewise for rewards. So he doesn't want, punishment and reward, being, kind of messed up. So his solution is God. He says that this never happens is best explained by God's goodness. And this must do until we have a clear understanding, according to him. So God won't allow it. Because he does realize that if the same consciousness is transferable from one thinking substance to another, two thinking substances could be one person, and that would be a problem. And his fix is God doesn't allow it. And we actually do here have an empirical test for his theory. If we can succeed in copying memory, then Locke would be wrong. And if we don't succeed, well, it doesn't prove that he's right, because we could fail for many reasons. But if we can't succeed, it would lend some credence to his view. Not a whole bunch, though, because, again, it could fail for a lot of reasons. So next we'll turn to his second question.